The young white front desk clerk laughed loudly when the 74-year-old black woman walked up to the marble check-in counter at the Sterling Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. The clerk, a 26-year-old woman named Brittany Hayes, leaned over the counter with a cruel smile on her face. "Ma'am, I am sorry. The Sterling Grand is a 5-star luxury hotel. Our nightly rates start at $800 per room. I think you may have walked into the wrong building. The bus station is 2 blocks south of here. The homeless shelter is 4 blocks west." The 2 other guests standing in the lobby behind the elderly black woman went silent. The 74-year-old black woman did not respond right away. She just looked at the young clerk for a long, quiet moment. She was wearing a simple beige raincoat that had clearly seen many winters. Her gray hair was tied back in a small bun. Her shoes were old and scuffed. She was carrying a small, worn leather suitcase in her left hand. To anyone walking past her in that elegant marble lobby, she appeared to be a homeless woman who had wandered in by mistake. She certainly did not look like a person who could afford $800 per night for a hotel room. Brittany Hayes was not finished. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave the lobby. We have other guests checking in tonight. Real guests, paying guests. Please make your way to the front door before I have to call security." The elderly black woman placed her small leather suitcase down very carefully on the polished marble floor. She looked at the young clerk with quiet, steady eyes. She spoke for the first time. "Young lady, I would like to check into my room. I have a reservation under the name Elizabeth Sterling. The reservation should be in your system. I always stay in the presidential suite when I am in Chicago." Brittany Hayes laughed out loud. "Ma'am, the presidential suite at this hotel costs $4,500 per night. I do not know what kind of joke this is, but I am going to ask you one more time to leave the lobby right now." Brittany did not even type the name into her computer. She did not check the system. She simply looked down at the elderly black woman in front of her with the same cruel smile. The bell on the front door of the lobby rang. A man in his late 50s walked into the marble lobby holding a small clipboard. He was the night manager of the Sterling Grand Hotel. His name was Anthony Bellamy. He had worked at this hotel for 31 years. He looked up from his clipboard. He saw the elderly black woman standing at the front desk with the small leather suitcase at her feet. Anthony Bellamy's entire face went completely white. He dropped the clipboard onto the marble floor. The metal clip clattered loudly against the polished stone. The 2 other guests behind the elderly black woman jumped at the sudden sound. Anthony Bellamy did not pick up the clipboard. He simply walked very quickly across the marble lobby. He stopped 3 feet in front of the elderly black woman. He bowed his head slightly. And then the 31-year veteran night manager of the most exclusive luxury hotel in downtown Chicago spoke one quiet sentence that made Brittany Hayes feel her stomach drop straight into her shoes. "Mrs. Sterling, boss, I am so sorry I was not at the front desk to greet you personally. Welcome back to your hotel. Before this story breaks your heart and rebuilds it again, do me one small favor. If you believe an elderly woman's worth is never measured by the simplicity of her clothes, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing. Now let's rewind. Because to understand what was about to happen at the front desk of the Sterling Grand Hotel that evening, you have to know exactly who Mrs. Elizabeth Sterling really was. Elizabeth Sterling had been born in 1951 in a small wooden house in rural Mississippi. Her parents were sharecroppers. They had picked cotton on land that did not belong to them. Elizabeth had grown up with 7 brothers and sisters in a 3-room house with no running water. She had walked 5 miles each way to a small 1-room schoolhouse for black children during segregation. But Elizabeth had been blessed with a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of business. She had moved to Chicago at 18 with $12 in her purse and a small cardboard suitcase her grandmother had given her at the bus station. Elizabeth had taken the only job she could find. She had become a hotel maid at a small boarding house on the south side of Chicago. She had worked there for 14 straight years. She had cleaned hotel rooms for $9 an hour. She had saved every single penny she could spare. By the time she was 32, she had saved enough money to buy a small, struggling boarding house of her own. Her husband, Jerome Sterling, a young black accountant she had married at 24, had helped her set up the books. Together, they had transformed that small boarding house into a clean, affordable hotel for black travelers in Chicago. Black travelers who were still being turned away from the larger downtown hotels in 1983, even though segregation had been illegal for decades. Over the next 42 years, Elizabeth and Jerome Sterling had quietly built one of the most successful hotel empires in the United States. The Sterling Hospitality Group now owned 23 luxury hotels across America. The flagship property was the Sterling Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. The company was privately owned. It was valued at over $3.7 billion. Jerome had passed away from a heart attack 4 years ago. Since then, Elizabeth had been running the company by herself. She was now 74 years old. Elizabeth Sterling had also kept one quiet personal habit for the last 42 years. Twice every year, she traveled to each of her 23 hotels alone. She wore her oldest clothes. She carried a small, worn leather suitcase. She walked into the lobby like a regular customer. She watched how the front desk staff treated her. She watched how the security guards looked at her. She watched whether the bellman offered to carry her bag. She had been doing this exact same thing since 1983. Her late husband Jerome had taught her one rule on the day they had bought their first boarding house. Elizabeth, the way our staff treats a small black woman in old clothes when they do not know who she is the only honest measure of who they really are. Anybody can be polite to a guest in a fancy suit. Only the truly good ones treat the woman in the beige raincoat with the same dignity. That afternoon, Elizabeth Sterling had flown into Chicago O'Hare from her home in Atlanta. She had been planning to do her semi-annual quiet inspection of the Sterling Grand Hotel. She had not called ahead to the staff. She had not announced her arrival. She had simply walked into her own lobby in her oldest beige raincoat and her oldest scuffed shoes. She had walked up to the front desk, and she had been met with 26-year-old Brittany Hayes. Brittany Hayes had been working at the Sterling Grand Hotel for 9 months. Her father was a wealthy white real estate developer in the suburbs of Chicago. He had personally called the regional vice president of the Sterling Hospitality Group 9 months earlier and asked that his daughter be given a job at the front desk because she had failed out of her freshman year of college. The regional vice president had agreed because Brittany's father owned 3 commercial buildings that the Sterling Hospitality Group was leasing for staff training. It had been a quiet favor. Elizabeth Sterling had not been informed about the hire. Brittany Hayes had developed a quiet habit of mistreating black customers during her 9 months at the Sterling Grand Hotel. The hotel's customer complaint records, which Anthony Bellamy had personally been quietly tracking, showed 7 separate written complaints from black guests over the last 7 months. All 7 complaints had been about Brittany Hayes. Anthony Bellamy had submitted each of those complaints to the regional vice president for review. The regional vice president, a man named Gregory Whitfield, had quietly buried every single one of them. Gregory was the same regional vice president who had hired Brittany as a personal favor to her father. Anthony Bellamy had begun documenting the situation privately for the last 4 months. He had been waiting for the right moment to bring his concerns directly to Mrs. Sterling herself. Now, at the marble counter, Anthony Bellamy was bowing his head to the small, elderly black woman in the beige raincoat. Brittany Hayes was standing frozen behind the front desk, with the cruel smile completely gone from her face. The 2 other guests in the lobby were now watching with complete attention. One of them, a businessman in his 40s named Daniel Park, was already pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. He had heard the entire exchange. He had also seen the manager, Bo. Elizabeth Sterling looked at Anthony Bellamy. She smiled gently. "Anthony, it is good to see you again. How is your wife Carol doing? Is she still teaching 2nd grade at the elementary school?" Anthony Bellamy nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am, Carol is doing well. Thank you for asking, ma'am. She still talks about the Christmas card you sent her last year." Then Elizabeth Sterling turned slowly back to face Brittany Hayes. The cruel smile was now completely replaced with pure white fear on the young clerk's face. Brittany was 26 years old. She was 4 inches taller than the elderly woman in front of her. She was wearing a tailored black hotel uniform with a gold name tag. But she had never been more terrified in her entire life than she was at this exact moment. Elizabeth Sterling did not yell. She did not raise her voice. She simply spoke with the calm authority of a woman who had earned every single inch of dignity she possessed. "Young lady, I would like you to type my name into your reservation system. Right now, please confirm to me that you find a reservation in the presidential suite under the name Elizabeth Sterling for tonight." Brittany Hayes nodded quickly. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely type. She typed the name. The reservation came up on her screen immediately. The presidential suite. $4,500 per night, reserved for tonight, with a special note in red letters at the top of the reservation that read, VIP, property owner, never require payment information. Elizabeth Sterling watched the young clerk's face carefully. She watched the moment Brittany's eyes saw the words property owner. She watched Brittany realize for the first time exactly who the small black woman in the beige raincoat actually was. Brittany Hayes started to cry. She tried to apologize. "Mrs. Sterling, ma'am, I did not know. I am so sorry, please." Elizabeth Sterling raised one quiet hand. "Stop, young lady. I am not going to listen to your apology right now. I am going to give you exactly 2 minutes to gather your personal items from behind that counter. Then you are going to walk out of my hotel, and you are not going to come back. The regional vice president who hired you, Mr. Gregory Whitfield, is also going to be terminated tonight. Anthony has been documenting the 7 complaints you have received from black guests over the last 7 months. The regional vice president has been quietly burying each of those complaints because your father pays him to do favors for your family. That ends tonight." Brittany Hayes started sobbing. She could not speak. Elizabeth Sterling turned to Anthony Bellamy. "Anthony, I would like you to do 3 things for me right now. First, please walk Miss Hayes to the door personally. Second, please call Mr. Gregory Whitfield at home and inform him that his employment with the Sterling Hospitality Group is terminated effective immediately. Third, please ask housekeeping to make sure my suite is ready. We will discuss your promotion in the morning." Anthony Bellamy nodded quickly. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling, right away." Daniel Park, the businessman in the lobby with the cell phone, slowly put his phone back in his pocket. "Mrs. Sterling, ma'am, I am a guest here tonight. I have stayed at 3 of your hotels over the last 4 years. I just want to say that what your night manager just did, calling you boss, was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed in a hotel lobby. Thank you." Elizabeth Sterling smiled gently. "Sir, the good Lord blessed me with a hotel chain that I built out of nothing in 1983 because the bigger hotels in this city would not let black travelers stay in their rooms. The least I can do, 42 years later, is make sure that any black grandmother who walks into one of my hotels in her beige raincoat is treated with the same dignity as anybody who walks in wearing a fancy suit. Anthony has been working here for 31 years. He has seen me in this beige raincoat probably 40 different times. He always knows. Brittany did not know because Brittany was not here for the right reasons." Elizabeth Sterling picked up her small leather suitcase. She walked slowly toward the elevator. Anthony Bellamy followed quietly 3 steps behind her, the way a good employee always walks behind a respected boss. Within 72 hours, the cell phone footage from Daniel Park had been picked up by every major news network in the country. The video of an elderly black woman in a beige raincoat being mocked by a young front desk clerk, only to have her own night manager bow to her and call her boss 30 seconds later, became one of the most watched hotel customer service videos of the year. Within 30 days, the Sterling Hospitality Group had announced a complete top-to-bottom review of every hire that Gregory Whitfield had personally approved over the last 11 years. 18 additional employees were terminated. 43 buried customer complaints from black guests across the 23 Sterling hotels were reopened. Each of those guests received a personal apology letter from Elizabeth Sterling and a complimentary 3-night stay at any Sterling property of their choosing. Anthony Bellamy was promoted to general manager of the Sterling Grand Hotel within 30 days. His salary doubled. His wife Carol was invited to a private dinner with Elizabeth Sterling herself the following month. The 2 women became close friends. Anthony Bellamy was also given a 5% equity stake in the Sterling Grand Hotel as part of his new contract. Within 10 years, his stake would be worth over $12 million. Brittany Hayes did not work in the hotel industry again. Her father tried to call in favors with 3 other major hotel chains in the Midwest to find her a new job. None of those chains were willing to hire her after the video went viral. Brittany Hayes eventually moved back home with her parents in the suburbs. Her father lost 2 of his 3 commercial leasing contracts with the Sterling Hospitality Group within 90 days. Gregory Whitfield was terminated from his regional vice president position the same night Mrs. Sterling had walked into the lobby. He was also charged with 2 counts of corporate fraud for the favors he had been quietly doing for Brittany's father over the last 9 months. 6 months after the incident, Elizabeth Sterling launched a new program at all 23 Sterling hotels called the Beige Raincoat Standard. Every single new front desk clerk hired across the entire chain was now required to complete a 40-hour bias training program before their first day on the job. The training program was designed by Elizabeth Sterling herself. It included a single video at the very beginning. The video was the cell phone footage from Daniel Park's phone. The footage of a young white clerk mocking a small, elderly black woman in a beige raincoat, only to find out 1 minute later that the woman she was mocking owned the entire building. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight. Brittany Hayes spent 9 months treating black customers like they did not belong in the hotel where she worked. She did not know that the elderly black woman she chose to mock on a Tuesday evening was the same woman who had built that hotel from nothing in 1983, because the bigger hotels in Chicago would not let black travelers stay in their rooms. Elizabeth Sterling spent 42 years quietly building a $3 billion hotel empire, so that no black grandmother in a beige raincoat would ever have to be turned away from a hotel lobby in this country again. And on a Tuesday evening at the front desk of her own flagship hotel, a 26-year-old clerk decided to do exactly the thing that Mrs. Sterling had spent her entire life building the Sterling Hospitality Group to prevent. Think about the Elizabeth Sterlings in your community right now. The quiet, older black women in beige raincoats and scuffed shoes. The grandmothers who built businesses out of nothing because the world would not let them in the front door. The women whose worth has been measured for 70 years by the simplicity of their clothes instead of the magnitude of what they have built. The world has been wrong about them for generations. If this story moved you tonight, do me one final favor. Smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. And drop a comment below telling me about an Elizabeth in your own life. The quiet older woman in the beige raincoat whose worth nobody bothered to ask about. Because the world is full of black grandmothers who own buildings the world has been kicking them out of for generations. And the only question that matters tonight is whether we are humble enough to treat every single woman in the lobby like she might be the boss before we ever find out exactly who she really is. See you in the next story.